The alarm on the sensor tower did not sound like danger. It sounded like a soft chime, the kind used for weather updates or supply ship arrivals. That was why nobody rushed. Rel Adaho was eating a piece of dried fruit when the chime rang, and he almost ignored it. He had ignored that same chime for 11 years. The outpost he commanded sat on the edge of a region every star map simply labeled as empty. Behind that label was a boundary called the Silent Wall, a long chain of sensor beacons stretched across thousands of light years. Its only job was to watch a patch of space where a species called humans used to live. Humans were gone. Everyone knew that. The war that ended them was so old that even the ruins of it had turned to dust. Rel walked to the display without much interest. He expected a rock, a dead comet, maybe a chunk of an old satellite drifting free after 20,000 years. Instead, he saw a single moving dot, cutting a straight line through the dark, heading toward Concord space at a steady, calm speed. He blinked at it. "Run it again," he said to the operator beside him, a young woman named Ione who had never once seen anything move out there. She ran it again. The dot did not vanish. It did not turn out to be sensor noise or a reflection off ice. It kept moving, slow and sure, like something that already knew exactly where it was going and felt no need to hurry. "Could be debris," Ione said, though her voice had lost its confidence. "Debris does not hold a straight course for 6 hours," Rel said. They pulled up the old identification files, the ones nobody bothered to check anymore, because they were considered historical curiosities rather than useful data. The computer matched the shape of the object to a hull design from the extinction records. A human warship. Rel read the words twice before he let himself believe them. The ship was old, its hull marked with long scars, patched in places with plates that did not match the original design. It looked like something that had been through many years of quiet repair, not war. It was not hiding. It was not running silent. It broadcasted its position openly, as if it wanted to be seen. Rel tried to hail it, more out of habit than expectation. He did not think anything would answer a wall of empty static that had not spoken in 20,000 years. Something answered. The voice that came through was calm, almost gentle, carried on an old-style signal that Concord instruments had to work hard to translate. It did not shout a threat. It did not demand surrender. It gave a simple message. "This is the Warden. I am not here to fight. I am here to speak." Rel stared at the console. Ione had gone pale. Around the outpost, other stations began picking up the same signal, and within minutes the chime that had once meant nothing was replaced by a much louder alarm, one that meant every station on the wall now had to answer to command. Rel tried again. "Unidentified vessel. You are entering Concord-monitored space. State your intentions." "I already have," the voice answered. "I intend to speak with your leaders. Nothing more." Humanity was recorded as extinct, Rel said, feeling foolish the moment the words left his mouth, as if the ship itself might argue with the record. There was a short pause, filled only with the faint hum of the old signal. Then the voice returned, unbothered, almost amused. "Records are only as good as the people who stop checking them." The ship did not slow down. It did not raise weapons or shields in any aggressive way. It simply kept moving, steady and unafraid, straight toward the heart of Concord territory, as if 20,000 years of silence meant nothing at all to it. Rel sent the full report up the chain within minutes, knowing that somewhere far above him, quiet offices were about to become very loud. He watched the dot continue its course on the display, calm where he was not. "Sir," Ione said quietly, "what do we do?" Rel did not answer right away. He thought about all the training he had received for pirates, smugglers, and rogue mining ships. None of it had prepared him for a single ship crossing a boundary that had been silent since before written history in most Concord worlds. "We watch," he finally said, "and we pray whoever is in charge up there listens before they decide to shoot." The ship kept coming, patient and unhurried, carrying a message 20,000 years in the making, while behind it, the void it left stayed just as silent and just as unreadable as before. Somewhere far ahead, without knowing it yet, the rest of the galaxy was about to lose its comfortable assumption that humanity had ever truly gone away. By the time the alarm reached the higher command centers, the ship had already crossed halfway through the outer monitoring zone. No weapons were fired. No warning shots were given. It was simply allowed to pass, because nobody in that first hour knew what else to do with a ghost that refused to stay buried. The council chamber on Havoc Station had not been this full in decades. Delegates from a dozen worlds crowded around the circular table, their voices overlapping in a mess of languages that the translation system struggled to keep up with. At the center of the noise sat Sanaa Vel, an old historian with silver eyes and a reputation for being right about things nobody wanted to hear. She had been called in only 2 hours earlier, pulled from a quiet research post where she spent her days studying dead languages and dead wars. Now she sat holding a data slate with a single sentence on it, the same sentence being repeated in every corner of the room. A human warship had crossed the silent wall. "It has to be a trick," said one delegate, a broad-shouldered official from the mining worlds named Dorian Kest. "A relic ship, maybe stolen, maybe rebuilt by pirates using old wreck parts." "The voice pattern matches archived human speech," Sanaa said, not looking up from her slate. "Down to the accent. That is not something pirates fake." "Then it is worse," Dorian said. "It means they never died." The room fell into a tense hum of muttering. For 20,000 years, the story taught in every school across Concord space was simple. Humanity had fought a brutal war, lost their home systems to some unknown catastrophe, and vanished. The silence behind the wall was treated as proof of death, never questioned, never tested. Nobody had gone back to check because nobody wanted to find out they were wrong. Sanaa stood, and the room slowly quieted. She was not a soldier or a politician, but people listened to her because she never exaggerated, and she never lied to make a point sound stronger. "Silence is not evidence," she said. "It is only the absence of evidence. We built our entire policy on an empty space and called it a graveyard. Now something has walked out of that graveyard and asked to talk. I would like to know what it has to say before we decide it is an enemy." Dorian shook his head. "You would let it walk right up to the center of Concord space." "It is already walking," Sanaa said. "The only choice we have left is how we respond." A message came through moments later, patched in from the outer monitoring stations. The ship, calling itself the Warden, had reached the edge of a heavily populated system and slowed its speed slightly, but had not stopped or turned. It repeated the same request it had given at the wall, a chance to speak with Concord leadership, nothing more. The military faction in the room wasted no time. A commander named Tarek OSS, hard-faced and quick to speak, stood and demanded an interception fleet be sent immediately. "We do not know what that ship carries," Tarek said. "One vessel walked out of a war that nearly ended an entire species. If it is a scout, then a fleet may already be following behind it, waiting for us to hesitate. Or it is exactly what it says it is," Sanaa argued. "A single ship carrying a message. We cannot risk assuming that," Tarek said. "If I am wrong and we do nothing, we lose everything. If you are wrong and we prepare, we lose nothing but time." The council voted, and though many hesitated, fear won over patience. An interception fleet was ordered to move, quietly, without full council approval, under the reasoning that caution was simply good defense. Sanaa argued against it until her voice went hoarse, but the order stood. She left the chamber that night feeling as though history was about to repeat a mistake she had spent her whole career studying. The mistake of answering the unknown with force before understanding. In her quarters, she pulled up the old archive files again, the same records everyone had memorized without truly reading. 20,000 years ago, human colonies had gone dark all at once, an entire species assumed destroyed in a single, unexplained collapse. No one had ever confirmed how. No one had ever gone to look. The theory of extinction had simply been convenient, and convenient stories tend to survive the longest. She thought about the voice from the ship, calm and steady, carrying no threat in its tone even while an entire fleet moved to surround it. Whatever waited on the other side of that silence, it did not sound like a ghost clinging to old grudges. It sounded like something that had grown, quietly, while the rest of the galaxy stopped paying attention. Far out in open space, the Warden's ship continued forward, undisturbed by the fleet closing in around it, its course steady, its intentions still unknown to everyone but itself. Sanaa closed the old file and stared at the star map on her wall, tracing the long, empty stretch behind the wall with one finger. "What have you built out there?" she whispered, "while we told ourselves you were gone." No answer came. Only the quiet hum of the station around her, and the distant knowledge that somewhere beyond the wall, 20,000 years of silence was finally about to end, whether the Concorde was ready for it or not. Space near the edge of the Dovan system was usually quiet, used mostly by cargo haulers moving between mining colonies. That day, it filled with warships instead, their engines lighting up the dark in long lines as they took position around a single, much smaller target. Commander Tariq OSS stood on the bridge of his flagship, arms crossed, watching the human vessel appear on the main display like a stubborn stain that refused to be erased. 12 Concorde warships surrounded it in a wide ring. The human ship did not react. It did not speed up, slow down, or attempt to break formation. It simply continued forward, as if the ring of warships around it was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Order it to stop," Tariq said. The communications officer sent the demand. A moment later, the same calm voice from before answered, filling the bridge with an ease that made several officers uncomfortable. "I am not going to stop," the warden said. "But I am also not going to fight you." Tariq's jaw tightened. He had spent his whole career preparing for threats that announced themselves loudly, with weapons ready and demands shouted. This ship did neither, and that unsettled him more than any threat could have. "Then we will make you stop," he said, more to himself than to the ship. He gave the order to power weapons. Around the ring, the Concorde ships lit up with targeting locks, dozens of them converging on the single human vessel. Yet even as the locks engaged, something strange happened. The ship's outer hull shimmered faintly, a light ripple passing across its scarred plating, and the targeting systems on every Concorde ship suddenly struggled to hold a lock, numbers flickering and resetting over and over. "Report," Tariq snapped. "Sir, our targeting sensors cannot get a stable reading," an officer said, disbelief clear in her voice. "It is not jamming us exactly. It is like the ship is confusing the scan itself." Tariq stared at the display. 20,000 years of assumed weakness, and this single vessel was already doing something none of his engineers could explain. He gave the order anyway. A warning volley fired from 3 ships, bright bursts of energy racing across the gap toward the human ship's hull. None of it landed the way it should have. The burst struck some kind of unseen barrier a short distance from the hull, dispersing harmlessly into faint sparks of light before fading. No shield flare was visible. No defensive systems activated in any way his sensors could detect. It was as if the attack had simply been absorbed by nothing at all. Silence fell across the bridge. "Try again," Tariq said, his voice quieter now, less certain. "Commander," his second officer said carefully, "if that was a warning shot from us, and it did nothing, a real attack might do far less than we hope, and provoke far more than we can handle." Tariq did not answer right away. He watched the human ship continue forward through the ring, unbothered, its pace never changing, its hull calm and unmarked despite the attack. The voice returned, still even, still without anger. "I told you, I am not here to fight. I carry no weapons crew, no strike teams, nothing meant for war. Only cargo, and a message. If you wish to stop me, you will need more than warning shots." "Then what do you carry?" Tariq demanded. "Proof," the warden answered simply. "Proof that silence was never the same as absence." Tariq stood there for a long moment, weighing everything he had been taught against everything he was seeing. Every instinct told him to escalate, to call in more ships, to force the issue before the situation slipped further from his control. But another part of him, quieter and harder to ignore, recognized something in the calm of that voice. It was not the calm of a bluff. It was the calm of something that had already won an argument it had not even needed to start. "Fleet, hold position," he finally said. "Do not engage." The order surprised his own crew as much as it likely surprised the watching sensors on distant Concorde command centers. The ring of warships parted just enough to let the human vessel pass through, its course never wavering, its pace never rushing. As it moved beyond the fleet, Tariq allowed himself a long breath, the tension in his shoulders only just beginning to ease. He knew what this meant. He would have to report not just the encounter, but the failure to stop a single unarmed-looking ship with an entire battle group. It would not be an easy report to write, and it would be an even harder one for command to accept. He watched the dot continue on the display, steady and patient, heading further into Concord territory with nothing standing in its way anymore. Whatever waited at the end of that course, Tarek understood now that force alone would not decide how this story ended. "Send the full report," he said quietly. "Tell them exactly what happened here. All of it." Behind him, the bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, already knowing that nothing about their next actions would be simple. Not anymore. Not with a ghost from 20,000 years ago proving it was very much alive, and very much beyond anything they had prepared for. News of the failed interception spread faster than any official channel could control it. By the time the human ship reached Corville, one of the largest hub worlds in Concord space, crowds had already gathered near the orbital viewing platforms, staring up at a sky that suddenly felt much smaller than it used to. Corville was a planet built on trade and diplomacy, its cities designed to host 100 different species at once. It had never expected to host a legend. The ship settled into a slow, careful orbit above the planet, requesting nothing more than a direct line to the full Concord Council. No demands, no threats, just a simple, patient request, repeated exactly as it had been at the wall. Inside the government tower below, Sanaa Vel stood near a wide window, watching the ship's position marker blink steadily on a floating display. She had barely slept since the council session 2 nights earlier, spending most of her time buried in old records, trying to piece together fragments of a history everyone assumed was already finished. "You look like you have not eaten," said a voice behind her. It was Doran Kest, the mining delegate who had argued so strongly for caution days before. His tone was softer now, worn down by the events of the past 2 days. "I have not," Sanaa admitted. "I keep thinking about what we do not know. 20,000 years is a long time to assume silence means nothing happened." Doran did not answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the ship's marker with an expression that mixed old fear with something newer, something closer to curiosity. "What do you think they were doing all that time?" "Surviving," Sanaa said. "Then building. Then, apparently, waiting for the right moment to say hello." The council convened again that afternoon, larger and more tense than before, filled with delegates who had spent the last 2 days arguing in private about what the ship's arrival truly meant. When the connection to the warden was finally opened, the chamber fell into complete silence, the kind that comes only from genuine uncertainty. "I appreciate your patience," the warden said, his voice carried through hidden speakers around the chamber. "I understand the fear my arrival has caused. That was never my intention, only an unavoidable result of the years spent apart." "You said you carry proof," Tarek OSS said, present now in person after being recalled from his fleet command to attend directly. His voice still carried the weight of the encounter days earlier. "Proof of what exactly?" "That extinction was the wrong word," the warden answered. "We were forced behind a boundary many of you call the wall. Records suggest my people were expected to die there, cut off from resources, isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Instead, we adapted. We rebuilt. We grew, quietly, without announcing ourselves, because the last time we were loud, it nearly cost us everything." A low murmur passed through the chamber. Sanaa leaned forward, listening carefully, trying to separate careful diplomacy from simple truth. 20,000 years, she said, standing so her voice carried clearly. "That is enough time to become something none of us can predict. Why come forward now, after so long?" There was a brief pause before the warden answered. "Because silence has a cost too. It breeds fear on both sides of a boundary. Yours, believing us gone. Ours, believing you would still see us as the enemy from an old war neither generation actually fought. I was sent to end that fear, not to start a new one." Tarek crossed his arms. "One ship, no fleet behind it. Either you are far more confident than any single vessel should be, or this is meant to make us underestimate what waits behind you." "Confidence, not deception," the warden said. "I came alone specifically so no one could claim humanity struck first or hid behind an army to make its point. A single ship cannot invade a galaxy. It can only ask to be heard." The chamber buzzed with quiet arguments breaking out in every direction, delegates whispering to each other in rapid, urgent tones. Sanaa watched Tarek's expression shift, the hard edges of his earlier certainty softening slightly, replaced by something more complicated. Doubt, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Outside, on the planet below, crowds continued to gather, staring up at the sky where a single ship hovered patiently above them, carrying with it either the greatest threat the Concorde had faced in generations, or the end of a fear that had lasted 20,000 years for no good reason at all. By the end of the session, no final decision had been made, but something had shifted in the room, a crack forming in the old certainty that silence always meant safety. Sanaa left the chamber that evening with a strange, cautious hope settling in her chest, the first she had felt since the alarms first sounded days before. Above Corval, the warden's ship remained in orbit, patient as ever, waiting for an answer it seemed willing to wait as long as necessary to receive. 3 days passed before the council agreed to a face-to-face meeting, and even then, the decision was made only after long, exhausting arguments that stretched late into the night. Security around the chamber had tripled. Guards lined every entrance, though few of them believed, deep down, that weapons would matter if things went wrong. When the doors finally opened and the warden stepped through, the entire room fell still. He was not what many had expected. No armor, no escort, no display of strength beyond a calm, steady walk toward the center of the chamber. He was simply a man, plain in appearance, dressed in a dark traveling coat, carrying nothing but a small case in one hand. He stopped at the center point of the room and looked around slowly, meeting the eyes of delegates from a dozen worlds before he finally spoke. "Thank you for allowing me to stand here," he said. "I imagine it was not an easy decision." "It was not," Tarek OSS said from near the front, arms crossed, his posture still guarded despite days of growing doubt. The warden nodded, unbothered by the tension in the room. "Then let me try to make it worth the risk." He opened the small case and placed it gently on the table before him. Inside were data crystals, old-style storage devices layered with records, images, and files far older than anything the Concorde's own archives held on humanity. He explained, in simple terms, what had happened after the wall closed around his people 20,000 years earlier. "We did not have the luxury of pride," he said. "We had only survival. Our worlds were damaged, our numbers small, our technology scattered. It took generations simply to stabilize, and many more to grow beyond what we lost. By the time we were strong enough to leave, we understood something important. Strength announced 2 early invites fear, and fear invites war. So we waited, and we watched, quietly, until we believed the time was right to try again." Sanaa Vel studied the records as they were displayed on the chamber's central screen, images of rebuilt cities, generations of careful growth, technology developed in isolation without outside influence. It was not a story of conquest. It was a story of patience. "Why send only one ship?" she asked. "If you are as capable as this suggests, a full fleet would have made a stronger statement." "A fleet makes a threat," the warden said. "One ship makes a choice. I came without soldiers, without weapons crews, carrying only myself, in this case, so that no one could later claim we forced our way back into your space. I wanted the first thing you saw of us in 20,000 years to be restraint, not power." Tarek studied him carefully, the memory of failed weapons and confused targeting systems still fresh in his mind. Restraint that could stop an entire fleet without even trying. "Yes," the warden admitted simply. "Which is exactly why I chose to show restraint instead of force. If I had wanted to prove strength through violence, I could have. I chose not to, because that is not the message I came to deliver." The chamber remained quiet for a long moment, the weight of his words settling over even the most skeptical delegates. Doran Kest, seated near the back, finally spoke. "What do you want from us now?" "Trust, eventually," the warden said. "But I do not expect that today. Today, I ask only for a small step. Allow a delegation of your own choosing to travel with me, to see for yourselves what my people have become. No fleet required. No weapons needed. Only witnesses." The offer hung in the air, simple but heavy with risk. Tarek shook his head slightly, still uneasy, but said nothing to block it outright. Sanaa felt her pulse quicken, recognizing the moment for what it was, a fragile chance to replace 20,000 years of assumption with actual understanding. "I will go," she said, standing before she had fully decided to speak. The room turned to look at her, some faces surprised, others simply relieved that someone had been willing to say it first. The warden looked at her for a long moment, something like respect passing briefly across his expression. Then you will be the first Concord citizen to see human space in 20,000 years. The council debated long after the meeting technically ended, weighing fear against curiosity, caution against the rare chance to finally learn the truth instead of guessing at it. In the end, the vote passed, narrow but real, allowing a small, unarmed delegation, led by Sanaa to travel beyond the wall alongside the warden's ship. As the session closed and delegates filed out, still murmuring among themselves, Sanaa remained behind for a moment, staring at the quiet case of data crystals still resting on the table. 20,000 years of silence was about to end, not with a battle, but with a single, careful step into the unknown, and she intended to be the one taking it. The small shuttle carrying Sanaa and 4 other delegates felt impossibly quiet as it detached from Corval Station and moved toward the waiting human ship. None of them spoke much during the short transfer, each lost in their own thoughts about what waited on the other side of a boundary none of them had ever expected to cross. The warden met them personally at the boarding bay, offering a brief nod as they stepped aboard. "Welcome," he said simply. "The journey will take some time, but you will not be treated as prisoners here. Consider yourselves guests." Sanaa studied the interior of the ship as they were led deeper inside. It was old in places, patched and repaired over what must have been centuries of careful maintenance, yet clean and organized in a way that suggested deep, practiced discipline. Nothing about it felt abandoned or desperate. It felt lived in, purposeful. The trip beyond the silent wall took several days, filled with quiet conversations, shared meals, and careful questions from both sides. Sanaa spent much of her time speaking with the warden directly, learning fragments of the long, difficult history his people had lived through in isolation. He did not exaggerate their struggles, nor did he hide them. He spoke plainly about famine years, about the slow rebuilding of broken cities, about generations who grew up never knowing anything beyond the boundary that trapped them. "You could have resented us," Sanaa said one evening, as the ship drifted quietly through space that had not seen outside visitors in 20,000 years. Left behind, forgotten, presumed dead. It would have been easy to return with anger instead of patience. "It would have been easy," the warden agreed. "But anger builds nothing lasting. We chose to build instead." When the ship finally crossed into human space, Sanaa understood immediately why the warden had insisted on witnesses rather than reports alone. What she saw was not a broken remnant clinging to survival, nor a hidden war machine preparing for conquest. It was simply a civilization, grown quietly and carefully, spread across a modest handful of systems, advanced in ways that were impressive without being threatening in their presentation. Cities gleamed along coastlines and mountain valleys, unhurried and thoughtfully built. Orbital stations hummed with activity, none of it aimed outward with any obvious military intent. Children ran through public parks beneath open skies, entirely unaware that their arrival marked the first time in 20,000 years that outsiders had walked among them. The delegation was shown research centers, cultural halls, quiet farming communities, and busy trade hubs, each visit stripped of any attempt to impress or intimidate. It felt less like a performance and more like an honest invitation to simply observe. "This is not what I expected," Doran Kest admitted quietly, standing beside Sanaa as they watched a peaceful market square filled with ordinary daily life. "I expected soldiers. I expected fear. Perhaps that is exactly why they wanted us to see this instead," Sanaa said. Back in Concord space, tension had not fully faded during the delegation's absence. Tarek OSS remained cautious, overseeing defensive preparations even as he waited for word from the small group that had vanished beyond the wall. When the first reports finally arrived, detailed and honest, describing not conquest but quiet growth, not aggression but careful restraint, even his hardened skepticism began to shift. The full delegation returned 2 weeks later, greeted by a council chamber even more crowded than before, eager to hear firsthand what had been found beyond 20,000 years of silence. Sanaa stood at the center of the room, the same place the warden had once stood, and spoke plainly about everything she had witnessed. "They did not come back to conquer us," she said. "They came back because staying silent forever was never truly peace. It was only postponed uncertainty. What we found beyond that wall was not a threat. It was a civilization that grew up without us watching and chose, in the end, to knock instead of strike. The council's decision, when it finally came, was neither instant nor unanimous, but after long debate, the silent wall was formally reopened, its ancient sensor network repurposed from a barrier of fear into the first true bridge between two civilizations separated for 20,000 years. Far from the noise of council chambers and public celebration, the warden's ship prepared to depart once more, its long mission finally complete. Sanaa came to see him off personally, standing quietly at the boarding bay as the crew made their final preparations. "You did all of this with one ship," she said. "No fleet, no army, no threats. Just patience." Patience was the only thing loud enough to be heard clearly, the warden replied. Force would have only proven what everyone already feared. Restraint proved something far more useful, that we had changed enough to choose differently. The ship undocked slowly, turning away from Corville Station and setting a steady course back toward human space, alone once more, just as it had been when it first crossed the wall weeks earlier. Sanaa watched it shrink into the distance until it disappeared entirely from view, carrying with it the quiet ending of a silence that had lasted 20,000 years and the fragile, hopeful beginning of everything that would follow after.